In this video, we are going to see 10 amazing chess traps in the Vienna gambit that you can use to trick your opponents and win more games easily. So let's move on to our first trap. After e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, you play f4. He takes, then you play e5, attacking this knight. Knight to g8 is the only move for knight, then you play knight f3, preventing queen to h4 check. He goes d6, trying to get rid of this pawn. Then you can play d4. And here he goes d takes e5. Then you play bishop to b5 check, and after c6, you play bishop c4. He takes this pawn as well, attacking your knight, but you just castle here, sacrificing this knight and taking advantage of this king, which is in the center. So after d takes c3, you play bishop takes f7 check, trying to deflect this king away from the defense of the queen, so you can take it. But he's not going to take, instead he is going to play king e7. Then he will play rook e1 check, and now he still cannot take, otherwise he won't take his queen. So he will play bishop e6, but you can just play rook takes e6, forcing this king to take this bishop, and then you can take this queen and you are completely winning. Even after something like king takes rook, you can play bishop takes f4 and bring all your pieces and checkmate this king in just a few moves. All of his pieces is just sitting on the back rank. Now let's move on to our next trap. After e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, you play f4, he takes, then you play e5, attacking this knight, and here he plays queen e7, pinning this pawn to the king. But you are going to unpin this pawn by playing queen to e2. Now he is forced to move his knight back. Then you play knight f3, just developing this knight and preventing queen to h4. Then he goes d6, try to get rid of this pawn, but you play knight to d5, attacking this queen. He goes queen d8. Then you can play this amazing e takes d6 check. Now he plays bishop e6, logging with the bishop. Then you can just play knight takes e7, forking the king and the rook. He goes king d7. Then you play knight e5 check, bringing another piece into play. He goes king c8. Then you can play knight takes e6, and after f takes e6, you play queen to c4 check. You have to block with the knight, and then you can play this amazing queen takes c6 check, sacrificing this queen. He takes, and then you play bishop to e6 check, and after king to b8, knight takes c6 is a checkmate. Let's move on to our next trap. After e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, you play f4, he takes, then you play e5, attacking this knight. He goes queen e7, then you play queen e2. Same stuff, you have to move his knight back. And here, you are going to play d4. He goes d6, trying to turn this pawn. But you play knight to d5, attacking this queen. And here he goes queen to h4 check, since there is no knight here. Then you will play this tricky g3. He goes f takes g3, and then you play this amazing e takes d6 discovered check from the queen. He blocks with the bishop. Then you play this amazing bishop to g5, attacking this queen and sacrificing the bishop. He takes, and then you go with queen to b5 check. c6 seems like a natural response, but this is a blunder because of knight to c7 check, which is a discovered attack on the queen, and after king moves, you can take the queen and you are completely winning. And what if, in this position, instead of taking this bishop, he plays g2 check? Then, you can just take his queen, and after he takes your rook and promote to a queen, you can play knight takes c7 check. He goes king d7. Then you can take this rook later, but first you're going to long castle, and after queen takes g1, you play this amazing bishop to h3. Queen to g6 is the only safe square for the queen. Then you go queen to b5 check, and after knight c6, you play knight takes e6. He takes with the pawn, then you go d5, trying to open up his king. He plays queen h6 check, but you can just play king to b1. And he takes your bishop, then you're going to take this pawn with the queen. He plays king takes d6, and then you play queen takes c6, king e5, then you check again, king f4, then you play queen f5 check, and after king e3, you play rook to d3 check. He goes king e2, then you play this amazing queen to f1 checkmate. Let's move on to our next trap. After e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, you play f4, and here he goes knight to c6. Then you can play f takes e5, and after knight takes e5, you play d4, grabbing the center. And here if you place knight to c6, then you can play e5, attacking this knight, and now this knight will be forced to move back, and you will have a lead in development. And here if he goes knight to g6, then again you are going to push this pawn, and it's the same thing. And here so many players have also gone knight in g4, defending this knight. But this is a mistake, because you can play e5, and after he plays queen e7, you play queen e2. He cannot move this knight back because this knight will be hanging, so he plays d6. And then you can take his knight, and after he takes your queen, you can recapture with the bishop. And now after he plays knight takes f6, you're just up a full piece and completely winning. Let's move on to our next trap. After e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, you play f4. He goes bishop d6. Here you're going to play f takes e5, forking this bishop and this knight. So bishop takes e5 seems like a natural response, but you can play d4, grabbing the center. He plays bishop d6, and then e5 is a fork, and you will win a piece. You can try playing queen to e7, but then you can play queen e2. Let's say he plays bishop to b4, pinning this knight, but you can just take this knight with the pawn, and after he takes your queen, you can recapture with the knight, and now you are up a piece and completely winning. Let's move on to our next trap. After e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, you play f4. He goes e takes f4, then you play e5, attacking this knight. So he goes knight g8, then you play knight f3. He goes bishop e7, creating a battery to play bishop to h4 check. But you just ignore this and play d4. He goes bishop to h4 check, but you can play g3. And after f takes g3, you play h takes g3, attacking this bishop. So bishop takes g3 seems like a natural response, but then you can play this amazing king to e2. And now seems like this bishop is trapped. If he plays d5, then you can play bishop to h3. And now you are threatening to play rook to g1, which will trap the bishop. So he can play bishop takes s3, but then after rook takes s3, this bishop is still trapped. And if you try something like say bishop h4, then you can play queen to g1, and now you're trying to attack this pawn, so you'll play g6. Then you can play bishop takes c8 check, and after queen takes, as you can see, this queen is being deflected from the defense of this bishop. You can just take this bishop, and now you're up a piece and again completely winning. And what if he tries to play d6 with the idea of trying to create some escape path for his bishop? Then you can play this amazing knight to e4, and now all these squares are covered around this bishop, and this bishop is trapped. And on the next move, we are going to take this bishop, and you will be up a piece and completely winning. Let's move on to our next trap. After e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, you play f4. He goes e takes f4, then you play e5, attacking this knight. So knight g8, then you play knight f3. He goes queen e7, pinning this pawn, but you play queen to e2. He goes d6, then you can play knight to d5, attacking this king. He goes queen d8. Then you are going to shock him with this amazing knight takes c7 check, forking the king and the rook. Plays queen takes c7, then you can play this amazing e takes d6 check, which is a discovered attack on the queen. And if he tries to block with the queen, then you can just take with the pawn, and now you are completely winning. Let's move on to our next trap. After e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, you play f4. He takes, then you play e5, attacking this knight. He goes queen e7, then you play queen e2. He moves his knight back, then you play knight f3, preventing queen to h4 check. He goes d6, then you play knight d5, attacking this queen. So he goes queen d8. Then you play e takes d6, discovered check. And after bishop e6, you play knight takes c7 check. He goes king d7. Then you play knight e5 check. He goes king takes d6. But then you can first take his bishop, and after pawn takes, knight to f7 wins the queen. Let's move on to our next trap. After e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, you play f4 and he plays the best move, d5, striking in the center. But you just play f takes c5, and after knight takes e4, you play knight f3, preventing queen to h4 check. He goes bishop g4, putting pressure on your knight, but you play queen e2. And here he goes knight c6, developing his knight and attacking this pawn, trying to put pressure on this knight. But you are going to play this amazing knight takes e4, and after knight d4, trying to put pressure, you are going to play queen to d3, attacking his knight. And now after bishop takes f3, you can play knight to g3, and now his knight is under attack and his bishop is also under attack. And you since save your knight, so he can try playing something like c5 to guard his knight, but then you can take his bishop and you are up a piece and completely winning. Let's move on to our last trap. After e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, he plays f4 and he plays d5. This is the best move. Then you play f takes e4, and after knight takes e4, you play knight f3. He goes bishop c5, and here you play queen to e2. He goes knight f2, attacking this row, but you just play d4, and here he grabs your row. Then you can just take his bishop, and after bishop g4, trying to put pressure, you play bishop f4. He castle here, then you long castle here. He goes c6. Then you can play queen e3, opening up this bishop's diagonal. He goes bishop takes f3, then you can just take with the queen, and after knight d7, you can play g3, attacking this knight. He goes knight takes c5, but then you can take his knight and you have two pieces for the rook, and you have a decisive advantage. Well, this is not the end. If you want to learn some more amazing chess traps like these, then you can check out this playlist. And if you want to learn some chess openings, then you can check out this right playlist. And if you don't want to miss the upcoming videos, then don't forget to subscribe.